folks. It's Monday, November 28th, 2022 at 1 PM. Therefore, I will call the Affordable Housing Trust meeting to order. Joe Powers, Chair, to my left.
Judith Underwood?
Don Howell.
Larry Brophy.
Brendan Lowney.
All right, thank you, folks. And in the audience, for the record, we have Art Bowden Housing Authority. We have Elaine Shilvin from Rios and Kathy Green from CPC in Rios. Thank you, folks. First item on the agenda under new business is to approve the minutes for October 24th and November 14th. Do I hear motions?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, unanimous, thank you. Old business discussion on the J.M. Gouldson questionnaire. So at our last meeting, Jen was able to present to us. She did send me the link and I did send it out. Did everyone receive the questionnaire?
I don't think is it with the agenda?
No, it was prior to that.
I didn't see it then.
All right, I'll do a reminder send after this meeting.
I'm sure it's fine now. I mean, do you
No, you have
need
to
to
submit
vote on
that, so
it?
no, you have to click and you do your submission.
And who would it have come from?
From me through Jen,
Who would the email say?
from me.
Like a constant contact kind of thing?
No,
or-
Nope.
Joe Powers
From
email,
Joe, okay.
town of.
Yeah, so Joe, for me, I have the old one, but I didn't receive the new one.
All right, I'll resend that.
Yeah.
I did get it,
You got it though?
The
Yeah,
date?
I mean, I usually have 0 issues, but
but I was cooking.
I can
I'm not
resend it, no
seeing
problem.
anything either.
Larry, did you get it?
No.
Okay.
It was on the 21st.
So last Monday.
yeah. Now I've got one from the 10th from you and then Ellen's from the 22nd.
I could just forward this from
If you
here.
want, that'd be
You wanna
great.
do
Thank
that?
you.
That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know.
So then really the discussion on that was just if everyone got it, and if you didn't, we'll resend it, and when you get it, please fill it out. And then, next item on the agenda is discussion on the purpose of the Affordable Housing Trust. So the reason why I put that back on there is, I know we've had discussion in the community and at various events talking about creating, obviously, affordable housing and preserving. But if we read our definition under the trust, it says, in accordance with DHCD. So after the copy, the single-page copy of the trust, and Don, thank you for sending around the full document. But if you look at that single page where it says purpose, you can also see what DHCD most recently defined as affordable housing. So for DHCD, at a presentation they did for the Mass Selectmen's Association 2 weeks ago, DHCD defines low and moderate income, meaning families that earn less than 60% of the area median income. And so in the slide deck that you have from DHCD, they use an example. The actual for our region, based on Barnstable County, is a family of 4 making $65,200. Now, they have a definition, as you can see in the slide deck, of workforce housing, but at that presentation, there was ample discussion on it, and they affirm that although they work on that concept, it is not baked into their low and moderate income housing. So I know at our community engagement forum, there was discussion about creating workforce housing. And my concern is, without discussion, is that something that the trust can dedicate itself to based on the purpose of the trust as defined in the trust document? So I wanted to generate a conversation based on that. So I'll open it up to the trust members. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At least initially, it's not going to cause a problem because we still have to, priority number one is still Marceline property. But overall, I mean, we had discussed this even with John Giorgio, is either 100 or 120%. But somewhere along the line, we've got to do that because our workshops, before Goldson had to go home with the COVID pandemic, we had a discussion, Art was there, about, I mean, I use the ladder metaphor, that it's kind of like a fake solution to hit the first two rungs of the ladder and then leave the next 2 or 3 rungs empty so that there's no upward mobility for anybody. And that's really what we're losing in the town, is there's no lower components, and even when there is, you don't graduate within the community and go up and prosper. So somewhere along the line, I hope we can consider looking at that, because that's a major thing, and I don't think there's anybody doing it. I know Hesh isn't, and then Hack and CDP are really focused on 60/80.
Well, it's probably because they can't.
Yeah, exactly my point, but that's a real egregious problem.
Yeah. Well, in the article, it says it is exactly how you described it, Joe, in the last couple of meetings, the low to moderate income housing as defined by DHCD. So I don't see how we navigate around that. The workforce to the 80 to 120%.
So, is there a desire for this group to bring that conversation forward, say, to the board or other folks?
Eventually.
So that others can work on that task while we work on affordable housing?
What about how we get our money, though, if we're getting it from CPC? We can only use it for low to moderate.
Correct.
So,
But the cell tower isn't encumbered like that.
Is this something that we could possibly have an executive meeting with our attorney to discuss, can we even do, like, how, from a legal perspective, how we can, can this body just change this?
no,
Or
this
does
is, you can't
right.
change
The
this.
housing
can't
committee
just
is not
change this.
encumbered like this. The housing committee is not encumbered like this.
Sorry, I don't know, I look to the audience, I know there's no
Yeah,
members
the housing committee
in
wouldn't
the
be.
housing committee here.
But they could.
Well, I guess my purpose is.
But you remember, they're gonna bring us, let's say they bring us a plan of action to do something to vote on. We have to follow these guidelines.
Right.
We do,
Yes.
if there's money involved. But the housing committee existed for the last 22 years without that. And in point of fact, did a bunch of things, one of which was Gomes Way. They were at the very beginning of that. They kind of coalesced public opinion, and there is a possibility of getting public-private partnerships together. We don't have to be driving the bus for everything. I don't want to eliminate the thought about, moderate workforce housing, because Mr. Waystack is a realtor. What's on the low end of the purchase inventory right now? 400 or 500 grand?
I would have no objection whatsoever.
Mr. Chairman, members of the trust, Richard Waystack in Harwich. Low end right now, is 4 to 450. That is, and looking at those numbers, many of you were at the housing forum in Hyannis. Many of you were at our own housing forum. You know those numbers, they're just not realistic. Your trust, you're limited to what you're talking about today and the affordable. We have potential outlets in town to assist. The problem is with all of the housing committees, trusts, advocates, and so forth and so on, it's how are we gonna get some housing done? Who's doing what? And if you guys can't do the workforce, great, give it to someone else to do it. Give them the charge, or have Board of Selectmen give them the charge. You guys, the trust, develop something, or work with someone to get it developed.
Thank you, and that was sort of the purpose for me for having the discussion out there, only because at our community engagement on housing, there was a lot of discussion on that, knowing that that was the Affordable Housing Trust Community Engagement Forum, and not a broader discussion. I think it's useful to put this on the record and act in such a manner. Judith?
So I would very much like us to have a executive meeting with our attorney to discuss this. And the reason is because I think my understanding is the state is going to re-examine a lot of the numbers that are gonna be coming up over the next year. And I would just like to sit down with our attorney and see if there is some legal approach that we're missing.
Insofar as changing the purpose of the trust?
Understanding the purpose of the trust and if there is flexibility or not, and have that as a legal opinion. And I'd also like to meet our attorney, quite frankly. But I think, so I can also tell you that when I sat on not the, my brain.
Housing Authority?
The Housing Authority, thank you. The Housing Authority had a number of different programs that they had tried to enact over the years. One of them was a buy-down, where they would take X amount of dollars and like help a family with 10% down or whatever that missing amount was. I don't know if they've, I don't know if reasonably dollar-wise that's something that they can even look at nowadays, given the high cost of even a baseline, right?
So there is no purpose under executive session that it would allow us to have the conversation?
Or a public conversation,
Yeah, we could
whatever.
have it in public, but I would just remind the trust that according to the board, our council,
Which board?
Board of Selectmen, our council is KP Law unless it comes to acquisition of properties.
So if we're considering buying properties and we're considering,
It was or sale. It was for
Right,
disposition of
But-
property.
purpose of the trust wouldn't fall into that category.
if you're, why are you asking the question then, the purpose of, I mean,
What I'm trying to get out there is,
why would we not,
So the last couple of meetings,
folks, can I?
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to wield the gavel or anything else, but I would like to finish the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
At our community forum on housing, which
Yep.
was sponsored by the Affordable Housing Trust, there was a significant amount of discussion on workforce housing. Workforce housing, however it's defined, and we can now rely upon a specific definition because there was not one before, from DHCD, does not meet the parameters of our purpose of trust. And so because of that, I wanted to get it out in this discussion point. As prior speaker had said, it's an opportunity for this trust to make the Board of Selectmen in the town aware of that separation and to get it to any of the other groups in town, committees in town, that could work on that effort while we work on the Marceline property for low and moderate income. So recognizing that, to me, the purpose of trust statement is, I consider it to be very clear and understandable on this reading, does not afford us the ability to do workforce housing because we know the definition of it through DHCD. So let's use this opportunity to put it on the record, get it out there so the town can still work on that effort while we continue our efforts on preserving and creating low and moderate income housing.
So I don't disagree with anybody, but I can walk and chew gum at the same time. The primary, I'm just going to remind everybody here, and this was said before you were here, Joe, is that my rule of thumb for affordable housing is unless you walk past the threshold and there's a roof over your head, you haven't done anything. That could be a buy down to keep somebody in an affordable house. It could be a rehab to the extent allowable by law in a trust or outright building, and it doesn't have to be us building it either. As a matter of fact, I would prefer it not be us as a developer, but all of our actions need to be focused on some sort of goal that gets somebody in a door with a house or an apartment. We can also discuss these other things, but I mean, I do agree, and I've heard it from a number of sources, that everybody's getting frustrated about the action, and I'm not too sure that they really care about the deck chairs on the Titanic as a discussion about what it is we want to be when we grow up. We do know that we have to do affordable housing, and that's 60 and 80. That's pretty definable. If we want to get into this other stuff, that's fine. That could be a collateral discussion, but we need like some sort of building blocks to get us into an actual build. And it's not that fast even when you have a plan. I mean, Richard was there with me. ironically, I felt like I was fighting with the town because it was the ZBA, but for 3 years, we were discussing how to do West Harwich and what turned out to be Murray Lane. It's not going to happen tomorrow, even if we said, okay, we got a contractor and let's have him come in with a presentation. The ZBA has to be involved. I mean, there's going to be A&Rs again because there's 2 blobs of land. We still have to discuss the eminent domain taking and where we're going with that. We got to take actions that result in something.
Yeah. And I think the housing folks can just jump right in on this, right? I mean, they don't, the housing committee, they don't need a charge from us, I guess.
The selectmen probably needs
Correct.
to be
Selectmen,
discussion.
yeah.
Why don't we just convey that to the selectmen, that there's a bigger,
That's the purpose of this discussion today.
and even DHCD, there is no legal definition by the legislature of what workforce housing really means. I mean, so we're in an area that's not definable by law, by statute.
Well, if I may, the interesting thing that I heard, one of the interesting things I heard on that presentation is that I know in years past, DHCD has referred to low and moderate income as 60 to 80. And yet in this rendition, they talk about it as 60%, and they were questioned on the call, is that a change? And the reply was yes. So they've walked away from the 60 to 80 and now focused on the 60%.
And
But the statute calls for 60 to 80, our trust
Yeah.
document calls for that
Our
too.
trust document called for us going based on what DHCD calls it.
But their stuff is in law, right? I mean,
Say
sorry.
again?
So, if
Wait.
you-
Yeah, it has to be based on Mass General law.
Yeah, it's not on a presentation that, I mean, unless the presentation was
I'd like to
based
see
on
where
the
that's-
law.
it's based on the
really derived
declaration of the trust, right? So the trust that was formed, is to Joe's point, and I kind of thank Joe for, the chair, for diving into the paperwork, because I'm not saying we lost our way for a little bit, we came back to it, but what Joe's been trying to do the last 3 or 4 meetings that I've seen is that he's trying to make sure that we're all on the same page, to make sure that we are focused on low and moderate income housing under the DHCD guidelines. And that is how the trust is set up. So we have to follow those rules. I think one question that I would have is, can we separate the cell phone money with, CDP money? If we could do that, then that's a different story.
It gives us some degree of flexibility.
Gives us some, that would be a question, but I think what Joe wants to do today, and correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I
is
think
to
you're on
get
the
that-
right path.
Get that consensus that we're all on the same page on how this is being read, the trust. And as far as legal counsel, I don't think we need to go any further than what we have in front of us. So,
But are you saying that it's gone from 60, 80 to 60, and that's been put into Mass General law?
So, as Brendan said, as the trust says, it's DHCD guideline. So
But the guidelines are based on Mass General law.
the guidelines are based on DHCD policy and directives.
I would respectfully disagree until
well, that's
that's
a government
clarified.
agency.
I would respectfully disagree that those numbers can, I think that there's gotta be a legal process for them to change those numbers.
So then we're questioning the validity of the Department of Housing and Community Development's ability to establish guidelines on what low and
I'm
moderate.
asking for reference of how those numbers, are they just by policy, or are they done through a legislative action? I can call our state legislative office and get a verification on that, unless you
I don't think there's, well.
Do you know? That's-
Yes, I wouldn't present it if I didn't know it, and I don't think there's a need for any one member to go outside the committee and not through the chair to inquire about this. This was a presentation that was offered to the Mass Selectmen's Association to update boards of selectmen in the Commonwealth on DHCD's latest guidelines. And so it's fully ensconced in their legislative and statutory responsibilities as given by law and legislature and governor. And this is where we're at.
So it is by legislature.
Yeah,
I think it's a distinction without a difference. I don't know that that matters. DHCD is the authority recognized by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts when it comes to affordable housing and to establish the criteria for low and moderate income housing and affordability rates. They get the data from the federal government and they determine how they are identifying low to moderate income. Whether that is based on prior statute, whether that is executive order because they fall under the governor, or anything else, I think is a moot point. They've established the guidelines as 60%.
So they changed the guidelines, in other words.
Again, my understanding is they changed it from 60 to 80 to simply be 60% of area median income. So that part did get modified at some point. Before we go too far afield, I do want to go back to what Brendan had said, because I had heard mention also to the cell tower funds.
That has nothing to do
From
with
my
it.
perspective, that's, when we talk about the purpose of the trust, the appropriating mechanisms are irrelevant.
Yeah, it wouldn't matter.
Whether it's CPC money or cell tower money, the use of the proceeds can only be for affordable housing as defined by our trust document, which ties back to the state. So all the money we have has to be put into the purpose of preserving and creating low and moderate income housing as defined by DHCD. And this, I think this is important because we're gonna get into a discussion, as Selectman Howell and I know, there was a discussion at the board level, Board of Selectmen level, at their last meeting, that as we talk about the RFP for the Marceline properties, that RFP has to hew to the purpose of the trust. So we have to develop an RFP to make sure that the developer is meeting those criteria for income levels and/or rents. Don?
I think it's even more onerous than that because the discussion started wheeling into, well, you know, they were able to get so-and-so in Yarmouth and such in another town. Those things were 40B style builds, developments, where there was some actual market rate in it. We can't do that at all.
Correct.
Because the money came from the CPC. So to the extent that, say we gave the land as a contribution to development, there is no prospect that even doing that would put enough arm's length distance between the purpose of the trust and the CPC money and getting anything more than affordable housing out of it. It would have to be 100% affordable,
Correct.
period. Nothing more. I'm just frightened because now we've gone from a discussion about workforce, which typically gets defined up to 125%.
Yep.
Giorgio had said in the summertime to us, if you recall, that he thought we could get to 100 on some of the other money, not the CPC money.
Right.
And now we're down to a reductionist thing at 60. My experience in HESH is probably not different from HAC or CDP. CDP and HAC would go bankrupt if the only thing they were allowed to offer was a 60% rental, 60% area mean income test for rental properties, because they get capped on rental monthly payments. And then there's also the utilities portion of that, which the governor gave the Eversource the right to raise the rates, but that comes out of the total affordability formula for all affordable housing providers. So what would have been the max rental even goes down further if utilities go up. I'm not sure who we're going to help here if that's stuck like that. I agree with you that if they said it, that's what it is, but I'm not sure what their intent is, because that's a very small,
Low bar.
it's a low bar. That's a cap. It's not so much a bar. It's a ceiling. And it leaves a vast number of people who we thought we were promising some sort of housing to. You know, like phlebotomists, people who are in the lower tier of professionalism, but teachers, firefighters at entry level, those people don't get be eligible for 60%. They're probably closer to 80.
Well, and, Don, you dropped a note. Correct. That's the purpose of this discussion, is to get that out there as it's gonna really define our actions going forward. Now, it gives us some clarity when we talk with J.M. Goulson Associates on our action plan, is what can we do as a trust to move the needle on a, and I'm always gonna refer to it as preserving and creating affordable housing. And there's some items, later in the agenda that get to that.
Yep.
It also, if I could though, it also gets to the type of trust we wanna be. And by that, I don't mean the purpose, and I know Judith, I think you have the mass housing document there. And, interestingly enough, that was
Yeah.
predominantly authored by Jen Goldson.
Yeah.
And that's the document, when you read it, it talks about, she identifies two distinct types of trust, and then the third type is a hybrid. But the versions that she talks about first is I believe it was the funding type of trust, and she uses the town of Yarmouth. And ironically, that's what we used to build ours in the beginning. And then there's an initiator trust, and that is a trust that would initiate the projects themselves. And so, when I keep, and again, for the benefit of all of you, being the newest member of this trust and trying to bring myself up to speed over the 6 years, 4 years, 4 years you've been in, or the trust has been in existence, I look at a trust as a fiduciary instrument and a fiduciary responsibility. And we, the trust, or the Board of Trustees, to be more accurate, could be in a position of acquiring money and then dispersing that money for the benefit of preserving and creating. So that, again, will tie into a later discussion about the RFP and some other things that are coming up. But again, for me, mission slightly accomplished insofar as if folks are expecting workforce housing projects to come out of this trust, I don't think that's an accurate assumption anymore. Not something that can't be done, but something that should be done in concert with the other committees that are out there. Don?
Yeah, my frustration is a little bit more tangible than that, because the town meeting article that it empowered us, it may have riffed off of Yarmouth, but also mentioned 7 other trusts, all of whom visited their sites. I got to tell you, everybody was initiating, and it was, except for Yarmouth maybe, and I'm not even sure that that's the case with those 2 developments on Route 28. So I think that they've strayed from that purpose. But I'm back to where I was with the initial comment. Everybody has dumped money into either one big project, which is what I'm hoping the Mars Line one becomes, but they've also done buy downs. I mean, there was at one point in time a Harwich Community Development Corporation. They built all of Driftwood. And there was a period in the early 2000s where we had to change the affordability restrictions on their deeds because they were strangely tethered to other housing as opposed to income. And income is the only thing that really matters because there's no direct relationship between what the houses are around you are worth and whether you can afford to even get into one. But we did buy downs too. And that was one of the things I was really looking forward to be able to do, to keep an affordable housing inventory of things that were going to be lapsing out of that inventory because the restrictions were lapsing or expiring. If this is really true, we can't even keep people in their housing that are between the 60 and 80% because we can't spend any money on that.
Based on the current definition.
Yeah, but based on that definition,
current
that's,
definition of our purpose of trust.
maybe the discussion isn't to find out whether it's true or not. It's to make some noise that you got to be kidding me. The rules of the game have changed so dramatically that even the existing stuff we have may be in peril that we can't save. Most of it was not 60. Just off the top of my head, I've been here for a long time. If it's restricted to 60, I bet you if you looked at the deed restrictions on Gomes Way, that's not the case, for sale.
60 is a difficult number to make nowadays.
That's my point, and I'm not sure who we're helping if that's the limit.
So that's why I'm curious about the legal questions. Is there some way to adjust this? Or to act as an advocacy group to these guys, or like, how can we support a broader base to support? I mean,
So for lack of a better phrase and something more elegant, the path of least resistance is for the trust to recommend changes to the trust document. That would have to be unanimously adopted here and at the Board of Selectmen. But rather than tilting at the windmill of DHCD, we would have to re-examine our trust, our declaration of trust and our purposes.
So could we sit down with the attorney and discuss how that happens?
So we can sit down with the attorney to talk about, I mean, to me, how it happens is exactly how I was described. It's in the trust document itself.
We just do it?
We just do it and we present it to the board and the board has to agree to it. I would recommend, however, that between Selectman Howell and myself, that we can update the Board of Selectmen that we're going through these efforts because the trust document explicitly requires their full approval as well.
I'd be willing to take a shot at that conversation because I think, forget about workforce housing now that we're getting into this discussion about the 60% being the limit. I don't think anybody is going to be satisfied with outcomes then.
Brendan?
But don't you agree, we don't even have anything in front of us, presented to us, to even go that route? And to spend money on redoing the articles in any capacity with lawyers, or even going down that route, we don't even have anything in front of us that's tangible to be like, let's change what we're doing. I'd say we stick with this, what we have, and let's focus on the parcels we have and getting the money and building up the coffers like we've always talked about. I don't see a need to change this article when it hasn't even been tested yet.
We could explore both.
Yeah.
I mean, I would prefer to keep the highest
If it
priority
has
as
anything to
building
do-
something.
If it has anything to do with spending money on lawyers to revamp this,
I don't think you're getting what I'm saying is if we accept that tether to the DHCD, we can't do any buy downs for imminently expiring affordability covenants.
well, maybe we do rental assistance then. Maybe we get the housing committee and charge them with the task to bring up some ideas with buy-down programs and rental assistance, but we don't have any of that coming to us yet.
It still can only be for 60% AMI.
You try and say they can't be involved in a rental
Might never
assistance
get
program?
there.
We can't get there. Not here.
Because of the way it's, and maybe we don't even need an attorney, maybe it's just, you know, the Barnstable County, 68, you know, there's a, Barnstable County's got a, like a legalistic phrase. And it's.
Well, this needs to be agended
Safety
again.
here. There's a regional, there's a regional baseline that is used that's different than the state baseline because some years ago, it was identified that the cost of housing here is much higher. Of course, this was set up pre-COVID, so I'm sure it's exploded even further.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just
Mr. Waystat?
talking numbers, Fannie Mae looks at Barnstable County AMI, 115,600. The 60% in real numbers is $69,350. That's the number you're working with, is total income. Now, I don't know if they're not using Fannie Mae, if they're using a different definition of
So,
AMI.
If I may, the number that we have from Barnstable County is 65,200 for a family of four, being 60, that's the 60% AMI.
Okay, so 65, 69,000, those are the numbers we're talking. We keep talking. If people who are watching this, who may be watching it, those are the real numbers. You know, the 80% pushes it closer to 90,000, but that 60% is still, whether it be 65, 69,000, as determined by Barnstable County. Those are real numbers. You know, and is that enough to house people in this community? You know, are we getting enough people? I don't know. Bottom line is, keep talking. We're not building any housing. Got to come up with something to say, we're going to do this or this or this. Housing committee's going to do workforce. Housing committee's going to do 80% plus.
But we already have a call out for the survey, and that sort of stuff's already in process. We're not doing anything, Richard. As you know, you can't just go out on a piece of land and start building a house. There's
Well,
stuff
Thank
that
you,
has
Mr.
to
Chairman.
happen. Right? I mean, we do have stuff in process, correct?
To what Richard just said, I mean, we do have to do that, except that there has to be a goal. I mean, if you sign an RFP that restricts, I mean, that has terms in it that says it's restricted to that and only that, that's what you're getting. You're not getting anything more than that. And
Let's do
the
that.
reason
That's
I'm
the challenge.
concerned about that is even if it goes to 69, which I'm sure it will, when Barnstable County does their next year's,
Probably more.
it's somewhere around there. But that's all income sources. Husband works, wife works, kids work at all. Everything all put together is 60-something thousand dollars. That's all I'm saying, is that as soon as you're talking that number and you're talking teachers, or firefighters, policemen, we're no longer talking about helping them.
They're out of they're past.
They've gotten past that.
Last, yeah. Yeah.
That's something that the selectmen do need to understand,
So
because that's above our pay grade.
I think if it helps, because Brendan, I know you might have limitations on your time.
Counselor, I'll stay for this. That's
Well, what I'd like to do is, unless there's more specific conversation on item D, I'd like to take item F out of order. Or, I'll say it another way, swap item C with item F on the agenda, so that setting the dates is the last thing we do. So unless there's objection, we'll take item F, which is discussion on preservation of affordable housing. All right, so hearing none. So as Selectman Howell had mentioned, as we know in the subsidized housing inventory list, or SHI list, which is included in the packet, we now know, the town knows that there are two specific units that are slated to come off of affordable housing restriction. In total, it's 39 units at two different projects or developments, I think is the best way to say it.
Yep.
So, letters have already been sent to the organizations in charge of those properties to see if they can join us at our meeting on December 12th. So according to DHCD, if a development has units that's under monitoring with them, and that only relates to 333 Route 28, so if you know where Harwich Port House of Pizza is, directly across that Davenport development, or it was a Davenport, they have a different corporate name for that structure. There are 11 units in there, 3 of which have affordable housing restriction. It is expiring in 2023, and the only way to continue it is with the agreement of the owner. Now, 61 John Nelson Way, we
Pine
believe
Oaks.
is Pine Oaks number 2. And I say we believe because the files for the town are not very descriptive of those particular units, and most of the information is drawn from Mid-Cape Church Homes website. Those units are not under a monitoring agreement, and I think it has more to do with the funding source, because I believe they used a Department of Agriculture funding source, so different than HUD. In any event, I've been working with representatives at DHCD to find out what ability the town would have to have a conversation, or not to have a conversation, we can always have that, but to see if there's any way the town can come to bear, because if we lose those 49 units, we are now well below 5%, and our subsidized housing inventory list, if that matters to anyone, is shrinking rather than expanding. So I'll open that up for discussion. Don?
More troubling news. All of Pine Oaks was built with HUD money. So the eligibility criteria is nationwide. It was all senior housing. So you're not getting families or workforce into there at all. Saving this is commendable. They've done this already on Development 1. 3 is up across from the community center. I don't understand why we wouldn't have Greg Winston and the rest of the board from Mid-Cape Church Homes in here to discuss what they want to do with that.
So again, they're invited to come December 12th.
Okay, but Okay, but that's, I just wanted everybody to be mindful that those are two restrictions that are baked in the cake. The deed covenants have to do with HUD restrictions, not with mass housing restrictions. And so the eligibility requirements are nationwide, and they're senior housing.
And standardized.
Yeah, I don't care as much about that as what are we trying to help here?
As Art Bowden comes to the podium, I will say, Don, my response is not to contradict you, but
Okay.
rather to tell you that Mid-Cape Church Homes is marketing Pine Oaks 2 as not senior living and as affordable housing.
They can market it any way they want to. I was around when the second one was done and the third one was done, and I know for a fact that they had to sign documents with HUD to do it, and it was always senior housing. And they got a waiting list that's longer than our harbor slip list.
Mr. Bowden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a little history lesson here to give, and I'm a little sketchy on some of the details because I've been retired for a while. Anyways, on the Pine Oak, this goes back to about 2017. This issue came up, and there was a number of units coming up for the same thing. They're going to fall off. And to come to find out, it was a HUD issue. And so I was able to get a hold of Gregory Winston. I had many conversations with him. He invited him down to his place and on and on. And the long story, the short story was, he secured a letter from HUD that they were going to renew their money application. So all his housing there comes under HUD. Everyone that lives there is on some sort of assistance. There's no market rate anything there in Pine Oaks 1, 2, and 3. So, and I know when we had Community Development Partnership working with us in Pelinda, she had started a file on this. So there should be somewhere in this building a complete file on all these properties, not only Pine Oaks, but other ones, when they were coming, if they were going to fall off their affordability rating or not. And it's more than you listed here. There's a number of individual homes. And over the years, there was a number of programs that were like home repair programs. And the individual homeowners got grants or subsidies or whatever to put a new roof on or upgrade a septic system or whatever. And they're generally like 15-year, they have to sign a 15-year affordability clause. So in other words, if they sold their property in less than 15 years, they'd have to pay off the whole grant, so on and so forth. But if they kept it past 15, the grant went away, and then they could go back on to market rate if they wanted to sell their house at market rate. So if you look at the chart, and I believe in that closet, there's a map we should drag out, and that the Housing Committee had put together some time ago. And it's still up to date because we haven't really added much to it. And it shows where all the housing is, and it kind of it does a lot. But there should be a file somewhere in the planning department circle.
Well, Art, let me start with that. First of all, thank you, because staff has been searching for several weeks on any of these subsidized housing inventory properties that are coming to expire within the next 15 years, and we have not been successful. However, I will tell you that we haven't looked over here, so you might have just identified a treasure trove of information. So thank you for that, because otherwise we've looked everywhere through the planning department. And then, oh, come on, you're gonna ruin the surprise.
No, it is there. I know it's there.
It's the second door, yeah.
Is it? Yeah, so again, number 9 on the list of things that I did not know. But Art, I also want to emphasize that, Art, the list that we're working off of, all right, so the map is great. Thank you. The map is great. However, this list that we have in the packet is sent from DHCD. Apparently, they send it every year. And this is what DHCD claims that the town has provided for the number of units.
The key problem here is just as discussed. I don't care who's in them. If they fall off our inventory, it's a catastrophic loss.
Right.
Oh, pardon me, but this list should be your list, vice versa.
It's labeled on
They
the
should
back,
be, they
Joe.
should be exactly the same,
Joe,
up to a certain point.
there's a label on the back.
2017.
What's it say?
And just for,
Property of Harwich Housing Committee.
So Art, the only difference, my understanding is, and I'm just gonna look at it real quick. Give me a moment. Yeah, so there,
Not on there.
say again?
That just got added, yeah.
Habitat,
Right, there's also some that are on here
but I believe Oak Street is on there.
that are not on the list. For example, this says 2016 affordable housing, 335, and we now are at 327. So there are 8 units here that are no longer on the list. And that could have been a situation where they expired. So that's what we'll have to match, but thank you.
can I ask a question, Joe?
Judith?
So, in the past, if there were, units like the ones on Route 28, for example, that were, owned by a private development company, has the town acted on that in some way? Have they?
I didn't hear the first part. Was there an address you mentioned?
Oh, I was just using the one, 333 Route 28, for example, or, yeah, because that's not what you think of as, I don't think HUD is part of that, but I could be wrong. But anyway, my question is there precedent for the town, like, do we step in and?
So that's why in those
negotiate.
2 instances, I've sent notices to the owners, asking them to meet with us to talk about what would it take, if anything, to keep them on the affordable housing restriction.
But is there a history of something like that?
For history for here, I would defer to others, but according to DHCD, because they're tracking it as subsidized housing inventory, the only option the town has is to ask the owners if they're willing to extend the restriction.
Okay.
Might I suggest that this is kind of like building a camel by committee, that we're not prepared to say anything conclusive about anything until they get in the room.
Yeah.
Correct.
So
Yeah, December.
they've just brought it up.
Sure,
It's wise to bring them in, so,
sure.
yeah,
That's a great idea.
I'm trying to be proactive, though, and letting the trust know in advance.
sure.
Anything else on item F? So then item D,
I do
go ahead, Selectman Hull.
Yeah, I do have one big bit of background information. I know that Mid-Cape Church Homes started having discussions about 6 or 8 months ago, because within the affordable housing community, that was, pretty well known, that they were discussing on their articles of incorporation changing their purpose because they want to be a developer. And they want to be a developer for general affordable housing, not just restricted to senior housing. I'm not sure what they ever did with that, because, as everybody has said, this was tethered to HUD. And the documents they signed were with HUD, and I'm not sure that for anything that they already had agreements with HUD, that HUD would ever let them get away with repurposing their articles of incorporation so that they would hold in peril the stuff that HUD money in HUD's accepted terms and conditions, which gave them the money. I don't think that those ever changed. I can't see how HUD would just say, yeah, that's fine, just let them go. Because the predominance of the money was housing and urban development at the federal level when they built all those.
Art?
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was at that meeting when Mr. Winstead was here, and let me give you my take. I've been hearing since the first time I met Gregory, and I heard from the horse's mouth that they were right on the cusp of developing a Pine Oaks 4. I don't know if they're going to call it Pine Oaks 4, but that's what the term he used. And it was a big project. It was bigger than 1, 2, and 3 combined. Big. And he was talking affordable and workforce housing all the way to market rate. That was 5+ years ago. And most recently, I had an occasion to be working on another little side project with the person that identified herself as the treasurer of Mid-Cape Homes, and said to me, Art, we're going to be building any day now. We got money. The only thing we need is the land. And that's what they came to the trust meeting, looking for land. Plus they were looking for a partnership. And they made a little pitch, and basically it didn't go anywhere. But they've been talking the same thing for a long, long time. I guess I wouldn't get too excited about that they're going to be building anytime soon. That's my take, that's all.
Thank you, Art.
But the restrictions go off regardless of what they're talking about because they're time sensitive.
Right, time sensitive, but according to DHC, could be extended by agreement. Or not even agreement, acquiescence, I guess is the way to say it. Anything else on that item? Again, hopefully, we'll have representatives available to talk to us about that on December 12th. So then the next large item looming on the agenda is discussion and possible vote on the development of request for proposals for the property adjacent to Pleasant Lake Avenue. The Realtor stepped out. I've been referring it to that. Of course, we also know that to be Marceline. Selectman Howell and I, at the last Board of Selectmen meeting, board members expressed a desire for the trust to continue movement on requests for proposals, and so the discussion can be broad, can be specific, can be anything we want, but I think we need to start having discussions that lead to votes on what we want to achieve relative to that property. And by that I mean I'll start it off and put out one or two intentionally triggering, for lack of a better phrase, concepts. And the first would be that we develop an RFP that asks a developer to develop the property for the purposes of low and moderate income housing. So that 60%, that AMI, which will be renewed in April of 2023 by HUD. Or does the town want to contemplate selling it to use those proceeds to refund the trust as a fiduciary, or anything in between? Larry?
Well, that's provocative enough.
That's the word, thank you.
Provocative, I like that one. It seems to me that one of the things that we should look to do, excuse me, is find more money. Find more money, it makes development easier. It's axiomatic, we don't really have to worry about that, but we've got the critical component right now, and that's land. We've got 13 1/3 acres of land, prime land, and the potential to have several more acres of land. I would suspect probably ultimately close to 20 acres of land. Having said that, it's not cheap to develop the land. It's enormously expensive now to put in hard infrastructure, and I think lessons that we've learned and we've noticed around town, we should seriously consider any infrastructure that we put in to be hard infrastructure, electronic, anything that's above ground now, go underground there. Eliminate a problem that'll pop up forever and ever. However, having said that, how do we fund it? One of the ways to fund it, I think, is exactly as you said, sell some of the land. Well, selling some of the land is a little awkward with that particular piece of land because it will have a restriction on it based on the acquisition method. However, we do have other pieces of land in town, and we can put those to use. Some of them are listed here. Some of them aren't worth very much. Some of them are not listed here. I know a couple that are not listed here, and some eminent domain takings should become available, I would suspect within the next 6 to 8 months, perhaps at the next town meeting. There are a number of parcels that we could acquire. If we acquire them from the town, that eliminates the difficulty of the use of the land, and we can use it however we want. And I would suggest that one of the ways that we use the monies that we collect from lands unencumbered is to pump that money back into an RFP for the Marceline property. And in that RFP, I would wholeheartedly agree with you on the idea of asking a developer how they're going to do it. What will they do? So there would be the potential of perhaps a public-private partnership with a couple of parcels of land in town, one public, one's private, and you could have the community that we're looking for up there to perhaps put in 50 or 60 or 70 homes, whatever the case might be. And we've all read and we've all been to enough seminars that tell us that we're seriously looking at rezoning some of the land to get a better and a higher use out of the land. 100,000 square foot parcels of land are never going to solve our problem of affordable housing. But houses that exist in town right now, and Richard could probably tell me exactly how many units are built in the 10, 12, 15,000 square foot range in town. There's quite a few of them. They work. We could do those. We could develop the lands there by putting in hard infrastructure so we don't have to put in sewers later, and the sewers could sit and collect over the next 2 or 3 years and then be hooked up as they come by. So there's a lot of methods there, but I think you hit two of the key things. That an RFP can ask you what to do, number one, and number two, how can we fund it? And the method on funding it is simple. We just find a way that is not encumbered by CPC funds, but the CPC funds are absolutely wonderful for buying the land, and other funds we can use for putting infrastructure in the land or buying down the cost of it, or in fact building some non-affordable housing that will allow us to make money and create more affordable housing. If I've made myself
Can we do
as
that?
unclear as I possibly could.
I don't
Go
know.
ahead, you can dance around that one now.
I'll
Brendan,
make mine kind of short and sweet, and thank you for that. I like the RFP. I like to still see us try to be involved in developing that, getting together with the developer. And as far as the RFP is concerned, I don't know if we can do this, but maybe have Don and Larry, who have really headed up the whole purchase of that property. They know it better than anyone else, whether it's a subcommittee or not, but to have them head up the RFP and get that in motion as soon as possible.
Don?
Thanks for the work.
We've been volunteered, Council.
Can I get a little bit more passionate than either of these two things? The only damn thing that we've accomplished here, the only thing, is we got a piece of land that's across the street from a bus station and a parking lot, a parking ride,
On a major
and a
road.
major highway that runs the entire length of the Cape, with no real abutters. It's the most plausible possibility to develop affordable housing anywhere in town. To give that up now, I think hell would have to be paid within the community, because we would have just burned virtually 2 years of time by doing absolutely nothing if we sell the property.
Oh,
I don't think he meant that.
No, I mean, but you were talking about
talking to the
generating
seller.
income and then redoing something.
Provocative statements.
It was provocative, and that's why I'm pushing back. I'm saying, good Lord, we're about halfway through the journey. If we put an RFP out and find out what we can really do, we can find out whether we really do want to proceed or not. Not knowing that, even having a discussion about letting it go, selling it and doing something else, puts us back in 2018 again. I think we're all going to get strung up, and I'd bring the rope. I mean, I don't understand why we would do that.
I think if we do a creative RFP and get it going, let the developer come to the table. He will do all the work. So, right, they will do everything. We don't have to do a lot of infrastructure. I think that, now, if we failed at that attempt, let's say it doesn't work, and we have everything else on the table with buy down, rental assistance, then yes, we could sell that and fund all of that. That could be something, but I think, to Don's point, it's like the perfect piece of land for what we want to do.
Yep.
You can't get a better piece. I say we go for the RFP, we find a developer who can look at 12-plus acres and be like, this is something we can work
And
with.
let's get that ball rolling.
And
If I
then,
could, very quickly. One of the things I thought you were gonna pick up on is no to the subcommittee.
I know.
Because you
I
can't
What
have,
has talked
I
about
know.
that. And for what it's worth,
What board?
what would, say again?
Sorry, you said the board has talked, are you talking about this board or?
The Board of Selectmen, so we're the trust, that's how I call us. When I say the board, it's the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
The Board of Selectmen is,
Has voted that we can't have subcommittees? I didn't understand.
the board is working on the committee process right now relative to liaisons, subcommittee groups, and procurement
On this committee or?
for all committees.
there've been some abuses.
Yep, for all committees. In any event, not really the main point. The main point would be, what I would look for as the chief procurement officer for the town is the committee, so if we want to rely on 2 members or 5 members or 4 members, what would help the procurement department is, what are the criteria that you would like to have in the RFP that would be sent out to the marketplace? What are the things that we want to describe as advantageous, highly advantageous, not advantageous, et cetera, et cetera?
We did that before you with the Sisson Road, so we're familiar with the ranking.
All right, thank you. Because the only, RFPs are pretty straightforward. The only difference would be for this group to personalize it to the subject property. So if
Rankings.
the committee wants, if the trust wants to do that, by having the 2 senior members in seniority. over
In
there.
age.
Thank you. Work on that,
And
that's one
looks.
thing,
There you go.
but we can also have it as a discussion of the committee. Judith?
Just for clarification, and Brendan, so when you said let the developer do everything, do you mean like the surveying and all these kind of?
Everything.
Planning board, planning, okay.
Everything.
We would set the criteria of what it is we're looking to do, and then give people who are really professional at this, who do this for a living, from town to town. It wouldn't be somebody new. And they would do whatever they would need to do if they're selected within the criteria that we have ranked them.
And the
So that has to go out with the RFP first. This is what we're looking for, and outside of price, we're gonna give priority to this, then this, then this, and then we're gonna score them. And then you talk to the developer about going out, and they give you reports about what they've surveyed and what they're capable of doing, whatever impediments they've got. But it's them. They are going to develop it and presumably figure out how it operates after it's developed.
And the
Because
reason
I
I
would
asked
say the
that-
government should not be doing that.
The reason I asked was because I was under the impression that we already had sent out a request to a surveyor to start that process. And maybe I'm understanding
That was
incorrectly.
before it was purchased.
Yeah, we actually
Okay,
paid a
so-
surveyor to go out there.
No, but we recently, at a number of our meetings, had discussed having a surveyor go and start that process.
That was on-
Irregardless of the.
That was
of
other
the-
properties.
The owner's unknown properties. To get the ball rolling, but maybe that didn't happen. Clearly it didn't happen, or somebody would know about it.
We're gonna have an engineer first.
I think to put kind of an analogy to it that you might understand, or maybe not, is that
I understand
this
this
suggests-
process, my question was just whether or not it had already started, because I had thought it had.
in some way, shape, we've taken baby steps, we haven't done a great deal. I think what I hear now is that we're gonna be the backfield, and the quarterback is gonna be handing the ball off, or throwing the ball, depending on what the case might be.
Can I ask a substantive question?
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
What Larry said.
Yeah, what Larry said. We now have what came in as multiple properties that we purchased that constitute two properties because we did an A&R. So that's what we have. There was a blob in the middle that was an owner's unknown property. The town meeting voted to do an eminent domain taking. I don't know whether it's appropriate to have any more conversation than this, about the minutia of that particular property, but I think it's really important to determine whether that is or isn't part of what we're talking about, because you're putting an RFP out. Are we asking them to build two developments that are bifurcated by one piece of?
That parcel wouldn't stop what we're doing.
I know it wouldn't stop, but it would significantly change what it would look like.
You could build around it.
Well, where is that process, Joe, with the board?
So the eminent domain taking is with council. It's been surveyed, and council's working on the next steps.
So, but that was, with all due respect, that's what you told us last meeting.
Mhm.
So,
Council's working on a number of projects and properties for the town. That's in the top 5 of their priority list.
so you don't have an idea of when they might turn it around?
It could have happened while we were at this meeting, it might happen in the next 2 weeks. I can inquire again as to the status of it. Mr.
Yeah.
Waystack, did you?
Richard Waystack still. I was part of the Harwich CDC that did the 7 properties down in Community Way, and that was a public-private partnership. I think you're visioning, Mr. Chairman, of putting an RFP out there gives you a vision, and there are people there are developers out there right now who are looking to do more of this work with municipalities, whether it's either and you talk about the funding, put it back into the RFP of how they're looking to fund. Are they looking to do a 99-year lease on the land? What are they looking? The bottom line for you and your goal is to create the affordable housing. The control of it, the income flow, the P&L basically, your job is to create the housing. Whoever holds it, there are a number of ways for them to do it, but I think by putting a visioning RFP out there with the fact that you will eventually have that property under eminent domain taken, and I would include that in it rather than doing it without that parcel in it. There are people who will look at that and say, look, here's a program that we're going to put together. You haven't even thought of this yet. We'll lease your land from you for 99 years for this amount of money. And we will do, as Mr. Lonnie says, we'll do the whole thing. We'll engineer it. We'll get it permitted. We'll put up whatever. And I think one of the items in your RFP should be for the greatest number of rental or home ownership or rental properties, and whether they're doing combined. And they may do that. So I think don't limit your RFP. Put it out there to say the maximum number of units that can impact those in affordable housing, either rental or ownership. It's a great way to do it. I know personally, I've spoken with 2 of them, developers who are out in the field who are looking to do this type of work. It's a great opportunity. It's a public-private partnership. Let the developers do what they do well. Let the town do what they do well. Great opportunity to put that into your RFP, Mr. Chairman.
And to the original question, I wouldn't mind, I mean, it's up to everybody else, because it's not really under the subcommittee. I wouldn't mind working with them based on what it is that we do here as ranking factors to create a work statement, because we got to get this thing rolling.
I mean, do you want to do it in an open meeting? we go through like a draft RFP and fill in the blanks.
Well, it would have to
or-
be brought back to open meeting no matter what.
Yes.
Yeah. we can do
Has
that.
to.
One of the things I wanted to get out from this trust is, what would the criteria be that you want included in that RFP? So what types of things do we want to add in there that are unique to that property rather than the standard RFP? So
for
that's
ne-
something we can start now, can carry over to the meeting on the 12th, and start, adding that to the framework of a standard RFP for these purposes.
Can we add it as an agenda item for next time?
Mhm.
To bring all your ideas?
The
and what you're
first one.
thinking? Yeah.
Personally, just off the top of my head, what Richard said appeals to me, and it always has appealed to me, and you've heard me say this, mixed-use housing, not in the sense of strata of income, but ownership, type housing, rental, a combination of things, so it just doesn't look like we're warehousing people, but it's a community, that they're actually building and mapping out for us.
Just for example, Mr. Chairman, this, admittedly, I'm going back in history, but I worked on a project in the Charlestown Navy Yard with the Bricklayers Union and the City of Boston that ultimately put in 50 units of affordable housing on the waterfront, directly on the waterfront, in fact. And they ran with either a 50 or 99-year
Lease?
restriction on the deed, all of which were deed restricted, and the Bricklayers Union were effectively the developers of it. And it worked very well. They used it 2 or 3 times around town. I think they're still using it. It also keeps bricklayers employed.
Thank you.
Can we make this like the first discussion that we had then, and maybe in the meantime, have them feed thoughts to you?
Absolutely. Did everybody hear that?
No, can you?
Yeah, make this the first agenda item for the next meeting, and then have your, not to each other, but to have your thoughts on the subject fed to Joe so that he can sift through them as the beginning of a discussion point about what the priorities are going to be.
Nice.
Yeah.
That should take up the whole meeting.
That should.
For what it's worth, I found from May 6th, 2021, a memo to us from Laura Schufeld from MHP with RFP questions to consider. I can forward it to you.
Yeah, those were relative to
Just to
system.
get the thinking going.
Thank you. Unless there's any further comment on that, that brings us to discussion on list of deeded properties owned by the trust. The intent is to have this as an ongoing topic of discussion until we've disposed of all the properties. And what I have on the list does not include the 0 Oak Street, although we still have to come to a final conclusion on that. I'm gonna be working with council and, excuse me, council, conservation, and the water superintendent to see if the credits that were mentioned for Oak Street is something that could happen, and we can derive value from that. In any event, what we have here are the parcels that are listed in the Article 61 from the 2019 town meeting. So I'll open that up for discussion on next steps on those items. And further, Larry, you had mentioned before, you're aware of other properties, so if you want to use this opportunity to add to that list, please feel free.
I think it's previously been on the list, Earl Road. That's, it's bounded by Earl Road, Patricia Lane, and Lower County Road.
So Earl Road is the recreation property that the Board of Selectmen were working on?
They call it recreation property. I believe it's general municipal purposes, but, yeah.
So that is a topic we can't proceed on yet because there are legal implications on that property that I wouldn't discuss further in this
Okay.
public meeting. So we'll put that one aside for now. Did you have others that you were aware of?
Can I just back up, though? If we do have that discussion at the board level, and I'm not going to get you in between all this, but I'd like to say this to Michael. I think the trust should be involved in an executive session if the board has one, so that we can, because there was an executive session between the Board of Selectmen and the Rec and Youth Commission originally. So I think it would be appropriate, because it's still not to a conclusion, and it would fall within an open meeting exception. Because we need to clarify the end of that. That could, if we are able to obtain it, it would contribute an amazing amount of capital to be able to devote to something we do want to build.
Yeah, some of them, I thought some of the owners unknown might have broken free by now, but obviously they haven't. Owners unknown or owners known but not paid, whatever they are.
Were there other properties that you were also thinking of, Larry?
There's a few, I'll send them to you. I
Okay.
can't
All
remember
right,
right now.
thank you. Any discussion on the properties on the list?
Go ahead. You got any questions?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying.
Brendan is our relative expert on the smaller properties.
So, I mean, when it goes to the J1, J2, J3, so we talked about that property before where most of J3, about 90% of it, probably 95% of it cannot be used. But J2 and J1, there's roughly 5, 6, 7 acres there. Maybe something can happen there, or maybe that's something we sell to get some money, just like Oak Street. They're probably, or is it too small or divided into two pieces, but maybe how would we get involved with that, Joe? An RFP to a broker to help us sell those?
Would that be an
or
auction?
would it be an auction? How would you do that?
So it's disposition of land. Again, standard way would still be a request for proposals. We're offering this. We're willing to take the best offer based on criteria and price. Auction is an opportunity. We haven't done that yet in the town, but it doesn't, for these purposes, but it doesn't mean we couldn't do it. Brendan, though, can you just walk me through that again? You said J3 is 90% probably unusable.
Right, if you look at
Vernal
J3,
pools.
you see the vernal pools, and there's a line that was drawn in during the town meeting. So it's really, just take a look at J1 and J2 in about a small fraction of J3. So J1 is 1.4 acres, J2 is 4.59 acres. So 4, 5, 6 acres plus what's ever left in J3.
Yep.
It is, but if you want, I could show you the line. There's a lot that we can't do there. The vernal pools are at the very north part of it, so there's not much you could do there. That's correct. So you would still sell all of that. So whether it's sold as one big piece or it could be divided up, because there's 2 access points from 2 different roads. So
Thank you. I'm just asking the voice from the audience, if he wouldn't mind coming forward, because I had a question based on the exchange that may not have been picked up. So, Richard, you had asked about the acreage.
The acreage of J3 is 17.35 acres, and Mr. Lowney is absolutely correct. A lot of it cannot be utilized. However, it can be utilized for density purposes. And still a great opportunity to market it. There is a value for it, for the density that can be utilized for the other 2 parcels.
Thank you. That's what I was hoping you'd please remain, if you don't mind. Put you on the spot. I appreciate that, because I'm not well-versed in that area. So what we have is 6 acres of developable land, perhaps? Is that what we're saying? And that the
Well, we
whole
don't-
development can rely upon the density?
I mean, there's no site plan there, so we don't know
All right.
without doing
So
a
how
survey.
would we market it for an RFP? 6 acres,
You're
You can't, if you want to take advantage of that for the purposes of density, you have to own it.
Yeah, so if Oak Street was 3 acres, and that was roughly $13,000 or $14,000 to survey. I mean, this is a pretty big parcel. It's probably gonna be north of 20,000 just to do that. So do you wanna spend the money to do the site plan and be where we are with Oak Street? And maybe it has a better result, or just put it, due diligence on buyer? I don't know if that's a good idea or not,
looking at 23-plus acres total.
yeah.
and you put the due diligence on the buyer.
Yeah.
You know, we see Mr. Chairman, if I may, the recent success of the auction of the low-value parcels.
Yeah,
And the
Tax
return on
collector
that
land.
was
Yep.
substantial. And I think that with that land that can be utilized, again, for someone who is developing, to look at the potential density that you can get out of that on the smaller parcels from the larger parcel, you don't have the time nor the money to survey that entire thing.
Again, if we put an RFP out, it's on the vendor.
Correct.
Just like get a developer for Pleasant Lake.
Correct.
Someone else can do all the work.
Can I just ask
thank you,
a
Mr. Waystek. Yep.
question for clarification? Are you talking about putting out an RFP to sell it, or are you talking about putting out an RFP for developer to come in and create affordable
To
housing?
sell it.
Sell it.
And why,
Restrictive, though.
why?
We picked it up
So-
restricted.
Why could we not put out an RFP for somebody to create affordable housing there? Or workforce housing,
Well,
better.
Yeah, why wouldn't you?
I think.
As
my-
opposed to just selling it, if it's
Well, because we
only.
want to get the most money possible to come in so we could spend
Or,
elsewhere.
but maybe it's a site what somebody
Yeah.
can get done quickly. I
Well,
don't know.
I think the idea is, Mr. Chairman, I think the idea is that if we sold it, A, we can immediately use the money, and B, the developer can do what he wants with it.
But we
They'll,
have
they'll do
money.
it quickly.
I mean, is this not a site that would be appropriate also for affordable housing?
Too many problems.
Are
The
the-
developer's gonna make more money out of it than we are.
I don't know that you could know that until you see
I mean,
a development proposal. And I might say something, there may be a binary choice here. If we want to decide to do that and have somebody else develop it, that's one thought. It's across the street from a whole bunch of conservation area that's held in common with the Conservation Trust. I'm not even sure that they wouldn't want to take a shot at buying everything so that they could preserve that property.
Yeah.
It's unfragmented, is my point. So, but between the two things, we should be able to get value out of it rather than just letting it sit there.
Can you do that in an RFP, Joe? Have both options? Or is that more like a request for information?
It's kind of tricky.
Not that it's a request for information, you can do that in the RFP. The problem becomes that it's two vastly different directions.
Yeah.
And so
How do you-
you'd have to weight one more than the other. And so that's where the criteria comes into play. Is it highly advantageous that a proposal come back for the creation of low and moderate income housing? Or is it highly advantageous for the dollar cost value that the town's being offered? So for me, we could do both, but we'd be better served trying to determine, not necessarily today, but at our next meeting and going forward, what do we want to use those particular properties, 1, 2, and 3, under item E? How do we want to dispose of those and for what purpose?
Isn't that the discussion we're having now, though? I mean,
Sure, we can continue on with it, but
I don't think we're going to conclude anything today. It needs to be done within the context of, we've just started the meeting saying we're going to do something on the Marceline property. We're taking concrete actions to do that. Whatever we're doing with these other things, if we're doing it to dispose of, if we're getting assets to be able to advance the cause, then that's the cause we're looking at. So it has to be in concert with that. If we want to sell it, my own thoughts are, if we want to sell it, it has to be in conjunction with what are we doing with the Marceline property and what's it going to cost us to get what we want to do in the end in terms of buy downs. I'm pretty sure the property's land itself is not going to be enough. I mean, the numbers off the top of my head that I'm thinking of is between $3 and $5 million of contributory money to get the 60% housing, because it's really expensive. Like I said, you don't get a return on investment at 60% that you would have at 80. But that's the focus. I mean, if we start getting, I mean, I'd love to see an RFP for this, but this is not the highest priority right now.
We could do it, though.
We could do
I
it.
mean, it falls on,
We have the same procurement office.
I know, keep Joe busy.
I don't want to get them, like, diverted in their attention from the major goal, which is what are we doing with Marside and when are we doing it? I mean, something's got to give here, because if people don't start seeing shovels in the ground somewhere, they're going to start getting really annoyed.
earlier.
Should have been at the last selectmen's meeting. He was. It wasn't pretty. I mean, and their reflection of the community at large. Something has, I'm so frustrated because in the private sector, the biggest impediment is normally getting regulatory approvals. Because you already have a deal. I was never restricted in terms of who I could speak to get a developer going. But in the government, you do. You have to have RFPs, and there has to be consideration of value, and there's procurement regulations that derive from state statute. That's going to take a while for all that stuff. And it's layered onto the regulatory restraints. Because you got to go through everybody. You got to go through the Board of Health, because on a 40B project, you don't negate 40B regulations. It's got to go through them. It's got to go through Conscom, even though we know what the answer probably is. And it's got to go through the planning board and then to the ZBA. So that's an alphabet soup of stuff, and people are just going to keep watching grass grow out there. We got to show that we're doing something, and the issuance of an RFP is at least a concrete action in furtherance of that. So if we can give the information to Joe before the next meeting about what we're loosely thinking of as priorities, and we start actually having a concrete discussion about what it is, those priorities that we're feeding in, how many of them are shared by other people on the board, and then you go and create the hierarchy that gives the preference. That's when they can issue the RFP. They can't issue an RFP until they know what the ranking factors are. They got no way of doing that. And those ranking factors come from us.
Judith?
So if I'm understanding this big picture correctly, given the first conversation we had starting out, there's no way that we could issue an RFP, like, for example, on this smaller property, for development of affordable housing that comes under workforce, like that property would be a workforce development. We can't do that. We can only put out RFPs for 60% or lower.
Our money and assets are restricted by whatever DHCD says they're restricted to.
Oh, but for this parcel, we'd be acquiring it how? We didn't acquire it with CPC money.
Yeah.
No,
No, that's not the
Because of our
governing thing. It's the
charge in the-
document that's the
Oh, okay.
governing
And once we
thing.
take the money in, we have to use it for,
It's not the money. It's the formation of the trust.
yeah,
And
once we
it's-
take the money, we use it
Yeah, but
as directed.
it
So I
derives
yeah.
from DHCD's regulations. We can't use any assets at all unless it's in furtherance of 60%, according
Correct.
to that reading of their latest missive.
So back to this property real quick. It is 28 acres. It's a zone 2, so it is restricted, so 10,000 square feet per bedroom. There could be some septic issues as well. And the frontage may not even be there unless it's gonna be a small development, which might be hard to do. So there's some restrictions on this property.
And
I mean,
they
this could
can't
be a
do the
prop-
density more. because
That's why I
it's in
mentioned the Board of
zone
Health. You
2, right?
cannot change the Board of Health.
Change
Folks,
the
sorry.
Zone 2.
Brendan, finish your thought, then Judith, then Don.
To me, this is a pretty attractive property that someone would probably like to buy, and it could be just for a single-family home, which kind of defeats what we're looking to do. But this is to get the coffers built up, the money that we should have, which we don't.
So
And we're
if I,
limited in what we
if
can
I
get.
could, not to interrupt you,
Yep.
but that's the central question for me.
Mhm.
What does the trust look at the purpose of the RFP to be for J1, J2, and J3? So Brendan, you've just said we could build up the coffers. So that would be a disposition for the purposes of acquiring wealth to then be further assets that the trust has.
Correct.
Judith, you've talked about the potential to develop it for affordable housing.
But I had forgotten that this was Zone 2, which is the water restriction, which, so the density, it doesn't matter. You can't put in 20 apartment units. Yeah, so I would say that, yes, selling this makes great sense for where we are right now.
All right, so then the RFP focus will be for the purpose of disposing, map 63 parcels J1, 2, and 3 for sale, for the proceeds to be put in the trust's assets for use for affordable housing.
Can I ask just one quick question?
Right, and Judith, if I may, I hand you over to Brendan. Brendan, were you all set?
Yes, I'm all set.
All right, thank you, Judith.
If it's a municipal property, can it not go into the MLS? The, you know,
The MLS.
the MLS system? Is there a
Multiple listing?
restriction on that? Does it have to be
Have to have a broker.
Sorry, you mean for the listing purposes?
for listing purposes?
you.
So that
The
it's
town
it's a broader audience?
It can, we just haven't had success with that. I believe it was 5 Bell's Neck that the town was disposing of. We were going to use MLS, but in the end, it was the RFP process that prevailed. So we could use it.
Can you do both?
The problem with that, though, is the town doesn't have the ability to put out criteria. The town doesn't have ability to make a decision. If we turn it over for listing, it's sold on the market, and the town has no say about anything.
I see, okay, thank you.
RFP is a good process.
And realtors tell me that RFPs are a good process, rather than make you get more steps in.
And we'll make
Thank
that
you.
the #2 priority.
Don?
Makes sense?
Yeah, that was the point where I was trying to get to. That's why I mentioned the Board of Health first.
Yeah.
Density doesn't matter. You could use it for purposes of zoning, but you can't get past Board of Health regulations. The Title V is Title V. And whatever they set it aside, for the water restrictions is what it is. I might say that since these all have delineated parcels, that if we put out that kind of a bid, we might want to put an aggregate bid in with it, see which is in the best interest of the town, selling it individually or as a package, because I'm not sure I really want to get trapped with the Affordable Housing Trust sitting on property that's not developable and it's not taxable because it's really owned by a town entity.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we wouldn't be great stewards of the land.
I mean, it's kind of cross purposes to what, I mean, I wouldn't have taken it if I had known that it was completely undevelopable and we're not going to wind up with anything but a conservation area under our jurisdiction, which seems odd. But I would think that if you could put out a bid that has, bid on one, bid on all, or give an aggregate bid and we analyze it based on what was in the best interest of the trust in terms of derived income, you could cover that then and hopefully sell all 3 properties as a package.
So if I could, if you sell all 3 as a package, why wouldn't you package them?
You could, but you may find that the impediment is that a part of the package is something that nobody wants, and they may not, it may deter them from bidding at all.
Or one's more expensive than the other and somebody doesn't
Yeah.
want it.
I used to put them out all the time. I mean, you just make it clear that you're going to make the award based on whatever it is the best interest of the town, unless you want to burn more time.
Mr. Chairman, again, can't you do your criteria? Packaging is highly advantageous. Buying an individual lot is advantageous. You can do that in your ranking under your criteria. But it would make sense, and with a parcel of the J3 specifically, if someone's buying the whole thing, they could technically, if they really want to, donate it to another organization, takes the tax relief as a result. So there are a number of ways that it is beneficial to sell it as a package.
Yep, that's kind of my point, though. I want to see it conveyed. I don't want to see us owning it in the end of that process. Because if that's the only plot that's left, then you don't get that advantage anymore. And all of a sudden, the tax advantage to them goes away because they didn't take it for any reason. They're not going to buy it to give it away as a parcel by itself.
Now,
But
another
money is
thing that
good.
we could add to the RFP, is there a minimum dollar amount that the town would not go below, or the trust would not go below?
So could we get advice from a broker on that?
I suspect we'd have to have it appraised, wouldn't
You
we?
have to.
I would think.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do it today in this room, is what I'm
Correct,
saying.
and that is another step, but something we should be wary of.
Can we
So potential
get a,
RFP appraisals for the properties.
Yep.
And we're talking all 5 that are listed here. Oh, except for Sisson Road.
So my immediate thought was the 3 that we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But I could do an RFP for appraisal for all the properties listed.
Mhm.
And just indicate that we're looking for an appraisal, well, I guess we'd be looking for an appraisal of each of the 3 and an appraisal for the 3 combined.
Yep.
All right?
Could we lump Depot Street and Oak Street in there after your due diligence on that?
So, yeah, they would be in the appraisal RFP.
But I
even
wouldn't do
though-
'em first.
Even though we'd hold them separate.
So 5 total, not including Sisson.
Correct.
Yep.
And then any discussion on item number 4, which is 0 Depot Street? And I'll look to my right for the man with the binder.
So, it's 43,000 square feet plus. It is not located within Zone 2, but there is some conservation issues. There's going to be 60 feet, do not disturb on any new construction on that. So you got to keep that in mind. So that parcel is very similar to Oak. It looks attractive, but when you have usually it's 50 feet, do not disturb, but because it's a vernal pool, it's going to be 60, I believe. So, and that's just a note I had from when Amy was here. So that property is very similar to Oak, and that would be something that after you do your due diligence on Oak, maybe we can do the same for this and list it for sale.
So I'm gonna look in the general direction of the audience. I don't know if this was a property that someone had talked about before, and if she wanted to talk about it now. Thank you.
Kathy Green. I think I said at the last meeting that I had walked that property with conservation agent, and it's really just the front of the property that is potentially buildable, maybe for a possible duplex at the most.
Yeah.
It's just not that much. There's a fallow cranberry bog in the back, too, so it's just not, most of it's not buildable, so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Thoughts on what we would want to do relative to that property, or are we gonna hang our hat on the appraisal process?
and you know, it wouldn't be large enough for the group that had come before for the Oak Street.
I mean, their building is a pretty big footprint, and they
Yeah.
want to do 4 bedrooms. It's 60 feet by 30 feet.
I don't see how we get the setbacks, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
With the setbacks
Just had
and
to
everything
ask.
else. I mean, without having a site survey tonight, I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I say do the appraisal.
It was easy to do Oak Street. Once we had that site plan, then we can draw all the lines on it, setbacks, 50, 60 feet, all, you know, and then you get to this little tiny square on 3 acres. It was really disappointing. So,
And no driveway.
right.
Golf cart.
Speaking as a true civilian in all these matters, for that property, is there value potentially if we offered it on the open market, if there's an abutter that could enhance their property by acquiring it, or is that not a thing?
Well, how we found out about Oak Street, what we can do with that, as far as the credits, so that it could
That
apply
could be
to
a
this
similar
property as
situation?
well. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Or is it possible to build a 1-bedroom little house?
Yep.
Maybe that's possible. So I think there's a little more value, there's even value at Oak Street. I mean, Oak Street isn't, you know, there's some value there still, if you want to build a little tiny house.
Yeah, but to Richard's
Say again?
earlier comment, the value wouldn't be with us doing something, building ourselves.
No.
The value would be somebody else out there who wants to take that economic risk.
Yeah.
Anything else on item E?
Nope.
So then, going back to item C, that would be a discussion on future meeting schedule. Larry, as you may know, your request for remote participation was
Remote
approved.
participation. Oh,
Yep.
good.
And so, are you with us in person on December 12th?
I believe so.
All right. So we do not have any meetings scheduled other than the fourth Monday of the month is on my calendar as a standard. Do we want to, the fourth Monday of next month is holidays. Do we want to build our calendar? Do we want to have 2 meetings in December? Do we want to pick up fresh after December 12th in January? What's the pleasure of the trust on our meeting
I
schedule?
would suggest, Mr. Chairman, depending on what comes up in the December 12th meeting, you either have one maybe the following week or within the next 10 days, or prolong it until the first week in January.
If we can wrap up the priorities to come up with an RFP,
Yeah,
our work here is nowhere near as important as implementing those priorities in an RFP downstairs.
oh, yes.
We would just be sitting here talking about what they're doing.
How you doing, guys? I'll see you.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Longman.
got 5 more minutes for Destiny.
So, do you want to have this conversation on the 12th, perhaps?
Yeah, let's see where that conversation about the RFP goes, because if that goes well, then that'll show us what we have to meet at the next time.
Yeah.
If it goes poorly, I think Larry's right, we need to follow up quickly.
All right, so then the only other thing to do is adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned, 2:42 PM. We'll give Mr. Lonnie credit for being here for the full meeting.